We're just waiting for a couple of minutes for people to join. In the meantime, feel free to explore the platform, AMeet. It has provision for putting in your comments. There's a chat box. You can send in your messages, your questions for the speaker there. Of course, we'll have time for a Q&A at the end of the session. So there'll be ample time to bring your questions forward. Just want to take this time just to thank everyone at the King Fahd University who've helped us organize this webinar. We're very happy to be doing this. We, of course, are EDITAGE, one of the largest support service providers to academicians around the world uh, through services, through training sessions like this webinar. Um, November is when we began a new partnership with the university, providing our world-class services at highly discounted rates. And yeah, so just before that, just want to thank Dr. Muhammad Khoja for interacting, for coordinating with me in getting this webinar organized. Of course, we're grateful to Professor Abdullah Sultan, the Dean, and Dr. Suhail, the Vice Dean, at the Deanship for their support in getting this webinar organized. So just want to thank them. I want to say that this is the first in a series of webinars that we want to do and we will be doing with the university. The next one is scheduled on the 14th of March. So you can schedule that on your calendars as well as let your colleagues know. There's a webinar on the 14th of March, the topic being on conference presentation and networking. Um, so I think we have about 26 people on the call right now, and even as others are joining, I thought I'd just take you all through the services platform that we have designed for King Fahd. So I'll just share my screen here, and let me know when you can see this. All right. So if you can see this, this is the EDITAGE King Fahd University co-branded website, and it is through this website you can log into partner.editage.com and this link. So I'll put this link in the chat window, so all of you have it. And through this website, you can avail of these services that EDITAGE provides, but at highly discounted and customized rates for King Fahd. In fact, the service scopes themselves have also been customized to meet the specific requirements for King Fahd. So here you can see services, how it works, and if you go to the services, you'll see under editorial services there are two levels. There's advanced editing, there's premium editing. The descriptions are here, what each of the service provides, and at the end you can select either one of those services. So when you do select, it'll take you to this page over here, and when you get to this page, all you have to do is upload the document that you would like to send in for editing. I have a test file here. Please expand the screen to full screen if you're not able to view some of this clearly. As soon as you upload your file, you can see here the word count of the file is automatically updated on the website. So that's not something you even have to calculate. And when you click on proceed here, the price of the document, the price of that service, as well as the turnaround time, the delivery date, when you will receive that file back and at what price are displayed. All of this is done automatically. And all you have to do is look at this, and if you're okay with this, then you click on proceed. As soon as you do that, there's a form where you're given, and you need to just fill in some of your details, any other instructions you'd like to leave for the editor, and all of that here, and you press confirm, and that's it. And then the edit is in progress. So similarly, we have Similar form for premium editing, and it's the same workflow. Going back up here, there are other services under the publication support services, and you can view this journal selection, journal submission. The prices are displayed, peer submission, peer review, graphical abstract, and then finally this service, which is grant support. If you have a grant proposal that you'd like an expert to look at, and give their expert comments, then this is another service that you can look at. All instructions are on the website in terms of what you need to do. You will have to, of course, complete payment in order to use these services. And I believe that the university provides a reimbursement, but that's after you have used the service. So the payments will have to be completed by the author. And then finally, any support that you need, you can write into EDITAGE to our team at customer support at editage.com. If you'd like to reach someone at the university, any questions you have on the service, then you can write into editing services at kfupm.edu.sa. So this is the website. I will put this link in for you to check out. Please do, and we look forward to receiving submissions from all of you. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Jacob. Dr. Jacob is a long-time collaborator, friend of EDITAGE, and an experienced trainer. He's a researcher himself, a peer reviewer, a journal editor, faculty who's taught at Rutgers University in the U.S., at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and now currently based at the Russian Academy of Sciences. And so, with vast experience, but also with a passion to train and to support researchers coming up, and basically showing them the way of how to successfully write and publish in the best journals around the world. I will allow him to make a more detailed introduction of himself. And with that, I hand over to Dr. Jacob. Feel free, all of you, to put in your comments. If there are any questions for me on EDITAGE, on the services, you can write into me, and I will put my email address there. Also to Dr. Khodja at editing services at kfupm.edu.sa. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Daniel, for the introduction. Can everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up. You can use the emojis, or you can type into the chat on the lower right of your screen. All right, I see some thumbs up there. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm also going to close the video because the bandwidth is not very big where I am. And I'll be coming back during the Q&A period. So this webinar will last about 1 hour, and then we'll have 20 minutes for questions and answers. And let's see. Let's just share my screen. Having a little problems with the share screen function right now, but just bear with me. I'm just going to close a window and then reopen it. Let's see here. EDITAGE. There we are. All right, I'm seeing the window I've been looking for now. So can everybody see the first slide? Can you give me some thumbs up? All right, this title of this webinar is Responding to Peer Reviewers' Comments. I'm a journal editor as well as a researcher. And I've been working for a top-ranked journal in zoology, but I do have like a chemistry background for most of my academic training. It's a multidisciplinary journal, and I've handled about 1/3 of all the manuscripts that have been submitted to the journal over the last 7 years. So I can give you some really good tips on successful strategies of how to get your paper accepted, and the responding to peer reviewers' comments. Even if you're rejected and encouraged to resubmit, doing the very good responses, making very good responses to the peer reviewers can increases your chances of getting your paper accepted. So this is just an opening slide to introduce EDITAGE's services. The webinar series is just one branch of their services, but they specialize in manuscript editing and all those other services that Daniel also introduced to you, even helping to prepare graphical abstracts, journal selections. They've edited more than 2 million papers and served over 500,000 researchers over almost 20 years of the company's existence. So I'm really happy to see the partnership with King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals, and you can take advantage of the services. So here's a quick introduction about me. I was based in China for the last 12 years, also working as an adjunct professor at Rutgers University. I started out the Institute of Chemistry of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and since 2014, I've been the managing editor of Integrative Zoology. In 2017, I became the senior editor of Integrative Zoology, which is ranked in the top 15% of the zoology journals worldwide. And I just started a position at the Russian Academy of Sciences that you can see on the bottom of your screen. Here, just a quick outline of today's talk. I'll be discussing the journal's decision-making process. There's a few hurdles that you have to jump over to get your paper accepted, and I'll give you a nice overview of I think two of the major hurdles. One is actually getting your paper sent out for peer review in the first place, which I'll give you some tips on how to write a convincing cover letter, and that's one of the biggest barriers now because there's so many manuscripts submitted to the top journals. Only the articles that have the best chance of getting accepted actually even get sent out for peer review. And there's like a lot of there's high rejection rates now, and rejection without review is a common outcome. So if you do manage to get your paper sent out for peer review, you can congratulate yourself, because that's more than 50% of the papers are rejected before peer review. So if you get past this stage, very frequently you have a greater than 50% chance of getting your paper accepted. And a lot of that has to deal with how you respond to peer reviewers' comments. So I'll introduce who are the peer reviewers, and then go over the full spectrum of decisions that are made in the editorial office of the journal that necessitate a response to the reviewer. And we'll go into the details of giving advice and tips on how to respond to peer reviewer comments. What happens if you disagree with the suggested changes. Don't worry if you disagree with the peer reviewer. This happens all the time. Remember that peer reviewers can only make recommendations. It's the editors that you have to convince to recommend your paper for acceptance. So I've seen some major disagreements with reviewers, between authors and reviewers, and even among reviewers. I'll get two very different reviews of the manuscript, and the author will actually have to choose to take the comments of the reviewer that they agree with. I'll quickly go over dealing with requests for major changes in your manuscript. Sometimes they will, especially in the chemistry journals, I've seen this happen very frequently during my 7 years at the Institute of Chemistry. The reviewers will suggest new experiments to be done, and or word count reduction, other major changes, and we can discuss what to do in that case. And then I'll give you some sample responses to peer reviewer comments. So first, journal decision-making process. As I mentioned in the introduction, one of the biggest hurdles now is getting your paper actually sent out for peer review. So when you submit your manuscript to the journal editor, the handling editor, like myself, will read the major parts of your manuscript and also the cover letter. And then I may consult with associate editors or subject editors, because I'm not an expert in everything. And I'll ask those other editors, the suitability of the manuscript to be sent out for peer review. And as I mentioned, many top journals have a greater than 50% rejection rate at that stage. If it gets sent out for peer review, again, you should congratulate yourself, because that's a big hurdle. And then you'll wait for the peer review to happen. The manuscript will be sent out anywhere between 2 and 3, sometimes even 4 peer reviewers. And then the journal editor will compile the reviews. Sometimes the journal editor will actually add their own review, but at least they will consolidate the reviews and make a recommendation to the editor-in-chief. And if I cannot convince the editor-in-chief to ask for revisions and consider accepting the paper, then the journal will reject the manuscript at this time. But if we feel that if some changes, even if there's major changes, we like to give the authors an opportunity to modify their manuscript to make it more suitable for publication. And we'll inform the author of the decision, and then depending on the decision, you'll have a different amount of time to do your revisions and then resubmit. So how does peer review work? This is a very simplified process. You submit an original submission or a resubmission, and then we do editorial screening. And if we do not send the manuscript out for peer review, often there's a mismatch in the aims and scope of the journal, and the aims of the paper are a mismatch, and you've just simply chosen the wrong journal. Or there may be other reasons. For example, if there's high text overlap, we may reject the paper based on high text overlap. And if this happens, you can ask the editorial office for the report of the text overlap, because they'll tell you exactly which sources had the text overlap. And then you can modify some of the sentences and put them in your own words, and that'll lower the percent text overlap. A lot of the top journals have a limit around 15%. Integrative Zoology, it's like between 15 and 25% is okay. Anything more than 25%, we may reject the paper. So after it gets sent out for peer review, and frequently with a decision, we'll go back to the authors, and then the paper will be published. So again, we'll either reject after peer review or ask you to revise the manuscript after peer review. Keep in mind that, if you get the decision of a revision, even a major revision, that basically is a nice message that the manuscript is good enough for publication, but you just have to make revisions to it, even if it's major revisions. We don't like to waste the author's time. If we feel like we could not do the work, or the revisions are well beyond, what, like, let's say, the 2 months that it takes to revise a paper, sometimes we will reject and invite the authors to resubmit, and then there's like no, the time limit is actually a lot longer. Major revisions we usually give 2 months, but if we reject and encourage resubmission, some journals will actually give up to a year to do the revisions, which sometimes will necessitate more experiments to be done. And then the authors will resubmit again, and that's the traditional peer review process. And if you do resubmit, there's less editorial screening happening, and it'll go a second round of peer review. And we try to engage the same peer reviewers that we invited on the first round, but the peer reviewers are not always available. So in that case, the editor will look at the peer review, your responses to the peer review. This is how it happened. What the peer review looks like in Integrative Zoology. The editorial office screening step, we actually added this step in 2016, and we actually the reject without review percentage at the journal increased from 33% to 60%. But we ended up rejecting the manuscripts that would have been rejected anyways. So we were saving the editor's time, the author's time, and also the peer reviewer's time. So keep in mind, a lot of the journals do a pre-review step. That's the editorial screening. And again, I'm not an expert in everything, so we'll involve the editorial board. Frequently, there's like between 40 and 60 very senior scientists serving on a typical editorial board for a journal. And we'll actually ask them to help screen the manuscripts. So even though our reject without review percentage doubled, our accepting percentage went up above 50%. So before it was like we were rejecting 75% of the manuscripts, but after we introduced the step to the journal, we were accepting more than 50% of the manuscripts that were being sent out for peer review. So you want to keep that in mind, that because of the workloads at all the journals, there's more manuscripts being submitted now more than ever, and it's a big job to actually go through all these manuscripts and screen. So we have a poll question here. How long do you think it should take to complete the peer review stage? So Neha, can you start the poll, please? Okay. Okay, if everybody voted, can we see? All right. If you look on your screen, votes are still coming in, so the percentages are changing. So I'll give you another 30 seconds. Okay, can everybody see the results? Looks like we have about like 8% for 1 to 2 weeks, 54% for 3 to 4 weeks. Actually, that's like an ideal time frame. And then 4 to 8 weeks is about 30%, and then 8+ weeks, 7% of the votes. So yes, I think a lot of the top journals, the most highly competitive journals, Nature, Science, they really expedite the peer review. A lot of the science that's submitted to them, is really like the latest, most cutting edge science, and a lot of attention is given to speed up that process. And in fact, if you're asked to do a peer review for Nature or Science, they want your reviewer scores back within 10 days to 2 weeks. So the entire peer review process will actually take about 3 to 4 weeks. That's the ideal world. Most journals, yep, we'll go back. Thanks, Neha. Go back. I'm going to turn off the subtitles here. Most journals are actually fall in the 4 to 8 week time period. Yeah, I actually did an analysis of the papers I handled, and the average turnaround time from initial submission to not final decision, but to your first decision is about 45 days. And I've compared that result with a lot of other similar journals. And so that's about 1 to 2 months or 4 to 8 weeks. Yeah. When you submit the paper, actually the editorial screening task can take up to a week, and it could take another week to identify the peer reviewers, sometimes even longer if we have trouble finding peer reviewers. And that's actually the most difficult part of my job, is finding peer reviewers. And then the integrative zoology is more relaxed with the reviewers. We give them 3 to 4 weeks to complete the review. Um, and yeah, we had actually at one point we doubled the amount of time we gave peer reviewers. We doubled it from 4 weeks, from 2 weeks to 4 weeks to return the reviewer scores. And we actually found out that the total time of the review decreased because the reviewers felt more relaxed having a 4-week deadline compared to a 2-week deadline. So that was an unexpected result at our journal. Some journals I know will take like 5 or 6 months to complete a review process. So, but it varies according to the journal. Some of the journals actually advertised how much time it takes on average from first submission to first decision, or from first submission to final decision. And if you go to the journal's website, the journals are actually competing for your paper. So we, as a functioning journal, we want to keep these numbers attractive for the authors. So what is peer review? Peer review is actually, I like to call it the gold standard of science, because peer reviewers are, they're not paid, they're doing a service for science, and they're helping to do quality control for journals, and also quality control for science in the big picture. So essentially it's a quality control mechanism by which experts evaluate scholarly works and ensure the highest quality of the science that is published out there. And of course, the more prestigious the journal, I think the higher the bar that will be set for the paper to be considered publishable for that journal. A lot of journals are actually looking for novelty. They want to publish a big breakthrough that will be cited a lot. So who decides the fate of your manuscript? The peer reviewers actually, surprisingly, do not decide the final fate of your manuscript. At the most, they can recommend a decision. And at peer-reviewed journals, the decision-making authority rests solely with the editors of the journal's editorial board, and ultimately the editor-in-chief. Even myself, as a senior editor and the managing editor, I can make a recommendation. Usually my recommendation is followed by the editor-in-chief. Occasionally I get overruled, and I'll have to recommend a paper for acceptance, and then it gets rejected by the editor-in-chief. So I'm very careful when I make a recommendation, and I always have I look at each paper, I ask if this paper is um, does it is the science is it novel, and is it will be of interest to the journal, to the readership of the journal, and we want to have a high impact factor like all journals. So we always ask the question: is this work have a possibility to be highly cited? That's a unknown question, because if you publish a paper, let's say in 2021. Then the impact factor is calculated for that paper by adding up the citations of a paper published in, let's say, 2022. Let's say the January issue of this paper. We'll have to add up all the citations that paper got in 2023 and 2024, and then That's a number of citations in the numerator and the number of papers published in that journal in the denominator, and then that ratio is the impact factor, which actually be calculated in 2025. So it's really far into the future that the sites are actually counted towards the impact factor. So is peer review a coin toss? So here is a graphic that just shows the probability of acceptance according to the reviewer score. And this is just on a 4-point scale. And you can see that there's a very steep curve, and probably in the middle is like the major revisions. 1 is reject, 4 is accept, maybe 3.5 is minor revisions. So if both reviewers recommend major revisions, I think you have about a 50% chance of getting a paper accepted if you follow the suggestions from the peer reviewers. And here's some journal speak for you from Nature. The primary purpose of the review is to provide the editors with the minimum information that's needed to reach a decision. That's why peer review can be delayed sometimes. I'll have 2 reviewers agree to review, and then only 1 will actually submit their scores, and then I have to invite more reviewers because I need to have at least 2 the peer review scores to make a recommendation. Typically, I'll ask for, I'll get 3 reviewers to agree to review a manuscript. And then as soon as I have 2 reviews back, then I'll proceed with a recommendation. So the reviews that I get from the peer reviewers, they help me make a decision, but they also serve as a great instruction tool to the authors on how they can strengthen their paper to the point where it may be acceptable. And I've seen some okay papers turned into wonderful papers from having gone through the peer review process. So these papers, they're fairly good decision or fairly good condition when we receive them. But after having gone through peer review, some of these papers have actually turned into excellent works of science. So peer review is considered like the gold standard. It's the backbone of academic publishing. Grants are also peer reviewed, and they help determine which projects will get funded from funding organizations. Basically, reviewers are doing this for free, and it helps to improve the science in their field. We ask peer reviewers to comment on the novelty of the contribution. They look at the sample sizes. They look to see if the experiments are repeatable or not, whether the science is trustworthy. So that has to do with the sample size and the experimental design, the statistics tests that are used to make sure that they're rigorous enough to be trustworthy. And then on the overall presentation of the article. So they help guide the decisions of journal editors. The standards of peer review actually will depend on the field, on the publisher, and sometimes even the journal itself. Most journals will have a minimum of 2 reviewers, but more is also common. Peer reviewers, I think, are overburdened now. They just get bombarded with manuscript reviewing requests. So I know there's a lot of pressure on peer reviewers. So typically I'll get 3 to agree to peer review. And then when I get 2 scores back, then I will proceed to make a decision. I'll also email that 3rd reviewer and let them know that I'll be making a decision soon, and that I would love to get their scores and submit their comments to the authors along with the other reviews that were done. So the initial screening, will your manuscript always reach the peer reviewer? At this point, you can probably guess no. Most of the top journals will reject without review initial submission. So there's approximately 3 million manuscripts submitted to journals every year. Given this huge volume of submissions, More and more journals follow a policy of screening papers before sending them for full peer review, where the Integrative Zoology, where I work, we started that in 2016. So during the screening, editors will look at the fit to the journal's aim and scope. We'll ask if the journal's the submitted paper is of interest to the readership. We'll look at the quality of the writing. Does it meet a minimum standard? And is the content and writing good enough for reviewing? If the science is good, but the writing is not, sometimes we will won't reject the paper, but we'll ask you to do a revision or maybe revise the English language, or give you an opportunity to resubmit without changing the manuscript number. And finally, we look at if the manuscript is compliant with the journal's instructions for authors. If you have a list of target journals, I highly recommend looking at the instructions to the authors for each of the journals that you would like to submit to. And also the article type. The article type can dictate what is there's a word count limit, or there might be limits on the number of figures and tables, how the references should be formatted, and so forth. So that should be a guiding document for you as you prepare your manuscript for a particular journal. So the benefits of the initial screening, like I said, we're rejecting without review more and more articles. And I like to think that we were rejecting articles that would have been rejected anyways after peer review. So I hope that this step saves the author's time, saves the reviewer's time, and the editor's time. So this rapid rejection will allow the author to quickly find and submit their manuscripts to another journal. And you don't waste the peer reviewer's time because then they don't have to evaluate a poor manuscript that would have been rejected anyways. So at this stage of the initial screening stage, I highly recommend all the authors to write an excellent cover letter. And you can make the editor's job easy by telling the editor, what is the novelty of your study? What is the significance of your study? And why your study should be of interest to the readership of the journal. If you have all three of those points addressed in your cover letter, the editor will that's the first thing I do is I read the cover letter and then I read the manuscript. So at this stage, it's more about convincing the editor to send out your manuscript for peer review. And here's some statistics on that. The reject without review can be anywhere between 6 and 60% at the initial screening stage. And there's on average, it's about 21% are rejected during the initial review by journal editors across all disciplines. It can be chemistry, biology, even social sciences. So who are the peer reviewers? The peer reviewers are experts in your respective field. A minimum of 2 reviewers are chosen, and we've actually had up to 5 or 6 reviews for some manuscripts. If it's a reject and encourage for resubmission, often I'll ask the 2 original peer reviewers to review the manuscript again, and then I'll choose a third and sometimes a fourth reviewer who are new reviewers to evaluate the manuscript. And they can offer a different perspective. So how do we shortlist reviewers? Journals usually have a pool of peer reviewers with a good track record because we rate the quality of the peer review from the peer reviewers. So we just give them a quick score on how good their peer review was and how timely they were. So every journal has a database like this. Now the Web of Science can be used in conjunction with some of the manuscript handling software. Like, for example, Scholar One manuscripts integrates Web of Science, and they actually select potential peer reviewers, but solely based on taking the abstract from your paper and matching it with abstracts from other papers, and then it finds the authors of those papers and then suggests those peer reviewers to peer review the manuscript. So it's partially automated now, and but I'll still go through and sometimes it's a very bad match because they're just using keywords from the abstract and the title. Some journals will give the authors the option of recommending preferred reviewers. Integrative Zoology, we ask the authors to provide at least 2 and up to 4 preferred reviewers, and also non-preferred reviewers. And this will save journal time in looking for reviewers. We do not always choose the recommended reviewers because the authors, we don't know if maybe the recommended reviewers are a colleague or a friend. So at maximum, I would only choose one of those preferred reviewers and then find the other ones on my own. Be careful when you suggest non-preferred reviewers. Some very high-end journals, high impact factor journals, will actually take that as a cue to invite that person. But I'm against that. I will respect if there's a conflict of interest between the author and maybe an opposed reviewer who may be at a competing lab, or have some other conflict of interest. So typically, I will not invite the non-preferred reviewers, but just be careful. If maybe it's better just to not name that person and hope that the journal editors will not choose that person. So again, you have to be careful here. The editors have to be extremely careful when selecting reviewers. Make sure that the reviewers have sufficient expertise to evaluate the manuscript. So there's some very highly technical papers or papers from niche subject areas, and these may take longer to review because it's just hard to find reviewers for those manuscripts. We like to do a balanced peer review. For example, if the authors are from Saudi Arabia, then I will not choose 2 reviewers from Saudi Arabia. Maybe I'll use a maximum of 1 reviewer, and then another reviewer from another country. The same thing for papers from China. I typically will not ask, the paper submitted from China, I will not have more than 1 Chinese peer reviewer, and I'll get a reviewer from another country. There's many types of peer review. There's single blind peer review. This is the most common type of peer review, where the reviewers will be anonymous unless they choose to waive their anonymity by signing the review. Integrative Zoology uses double-blind peer review. So we hide the author's information from the reviewers. And of course, the authors cannot see who the reviewers are unless they sign their review. So we hide the identities from each other. We feel that this gives a more balanced peer review, less biased peer review. A lot of the nature journals have this option of double-blind peer review. You can check the box and make sure you delete the author's names from the title page, and also delete or just move the acknowledgement section to to another file that's not included with the files that will be peer reviewed. And there's a new system of peer review called open peer review, and this is where the identities of the authors and reviewers are known to all parties. A lot of the frontiers journals are now doing open peer review, and we have some examples of open peer review. So eLife, PeerJ. So then double-blind peer review, Nature Geosciences and Nature Climate Change are double-blind, which may be some journals for the university where you are currently located. So decisions that necessitate a response to the reviewer. So there are 6 standard decisions that you will typically receive from the editorial office after you submit your manuscript. Of those 6 decisions, 3 of them will necessitate responses to the peer reviewer comments. And keep in mind, it's a good decision to have this. It means that the journal would like to publish your paper, but you have to make some revisions first. So don't start celebrating yet. You still have a lot to do. If you get a major revision request, remember that the paper is still not accepted, but it has a good chance. Study the letter and reviews very carefully. You can make sure you send a quick note to the editor, noting any questions or constraints you have in completing the revision. For example, if you're asked to complete additional experiments, you may want to ask for an extension beyond the 2 months that is normally given for revising a manuscript that has a decision of major revision. So at this point, you should revise your manuscript systematically according to the reviewer's suggestions and provide a list of changes made or not made, like if you disagree with the reviewer, and why. And then you can revise and return the paper within the specified deadline. Another decision is minor revision. This is an excellent decision to get because that means the paper probably has a greater than 80% chance of getting accepted if it has minor revision as the decision. But remember, it's still not accepted at this stage, but it has a very good chance. You still want to study the letter and the reviews very carefully. Even though they're minor revisions, they're still important to make them. And don't forget to reply to the editor, noting any questions or constraints, and do the revisions. Pay attention to the small details in writing and formatting, because that's typically what they're asking for if you're asked to do minor revisions. And make that same list of the changes you made and or you didn't make them and why, and revise and return the paper within the specified deadline. Provisionally accept. This is kind of like accept with minor revisions, or you may get this after you submit minor revisions. At this point, if you get that as a decision, not all journals will make that decision. They'll just go from minor revision to accept. If you do get the provisional accept, it's probably just formatting issues. It could be figures and tables that have to be revised. And at this point, they're just gathering like all the final materials that the journal needs to send your manuscript to the journal production office. So at this point, you don't start celebrating yet. Remember, unless you get the acceptance letter, it's not a formal acceptance. So study the requested changes carefully, do the revisions systematically, pay attention to small details in the writing and formatting. At this point, the initial submission stage, you may be asked to provide low resolution images for your figures. And at this point, they'll ask for high resolution figures for your images. A lot of journals will actually ask for a graphical abstract because most research now is published online, and many journals are switching to graphical abstracts. They may not require them at the initial submission, but they will require them in the revision stage of your writing. So be prepared to have a graphical abstract as well. And then return the paper within the specified deadline. At this point, the deadline might be very tight. They might want everything back within 48 hours to 72 hours or even shorter. And so yeah, you want to really work hard to get the final files in. So I'll be covering some tips on how to respond to peer reviewer comments. And we have a second poll here. Are you currently waiting for comments from peer reviewers now? Yes or no? So I'll give you 30 seconds to answer this. I also get to vote, so I'll submit my vote as well. Okay, I'll give you about 10 more seconds to submit your votes. All right, thanks, Neha. Can you show the results? All right, we have about 2/3 of you have papers out for peer review. I am not one of them. So yeah, this is a very timely subject then. So you'll be better informed when you respond to your peer review comments. There you go. So here's some advice for authors. So just be patient. When your manuscript is up for peer review, you can track your manuscript. Most journals will have a manuscript tracking as part of the software program that they use, like Scholar One. You can see if it's selecting reviewers or awaiting peer reviewer scores. Keep in mind, if you feel that your manuscript is being hung up for a long time, if it's stuck in a certain stage of the peer review process, sometimes it's a good idea to email your handling editor or the editorial office and just ask about if everything is okay with the manuscript. So don't be shy if your manuscript is hung up. But if it's only been a few weeks, I would just be patient and do not contact the editorial office. So you might be on tetherhooks for weeks or months before you hear back from the journal editor. But when you do get the decision back, the comments from the peer reviewers and the journal editor do not need to be a bitter pill to swallow if you are prepared to deal with the peer reviewer comments pragmatically. One tip is to take a break after you receive the peer reviewer's comments or you get your decision letter. Initial irritation is only natural, so I would carefully read the decision letter and then just put it aside for a day or two, and then you can come back to the decision letter later, and you can carefully and objectively ensure that you have clearly understood the reviewer's concerns. It's not possible to understand all the peer reviewer comments, so sometimes you have to decipher what the comments actually mean. There's some very vague comments that you may receive. For example, the study is descriptive. I've seen that hundreds of times in a peer review. That basically means the paper lists data that do not come together in a clear hypothesis-driven study. So it's just descriptive. Maybe it does not have enough statistical rigor. It could just be like a data paper. It doesn't give a clear answer to a hypothesis. Another comment that I've frequently seen as an editor is the study is incremental, which means that the advance that is reported in the paper is actually too small to be considered a separate publishable paper. So that comment basically means the work builds on previous work without contributing any major new concepts. Or the comment may be the study lacks important controls. In this case, additional experiments are probably needed for validation of your study. And this is my favorite comment, most vague comment of all, is the data are not convincing. So I think I've seen that several hundred times as a journal editor. And then the authors will be frustrated to understand what that means. And usually it means that there's insufficient data, maybe the sample sizes are not big enough, that you cannot validate the main conclusions of the work. You may have overstated the results, so you may be able to respond to this comment by toning down your conclusions. Or you might be sent back to collect more data if you're asked to review or to revise your manuscript. So the data quality and statistical significance may be inadequate, or maybe the overall writing style might have obscured the main message of the manuscript. So that's how you can interpret that particularly vague comment. So some tips on responding to the peer reviewer's comments. Carefully read and reread the comments. Often it takes several readings of the decision letter to actually understand what all the comments mean. At this point, you can decide whether you can address the reviewer comments or not for resubmission, especially with the given time frame. Minor revisions is about a month. Major revisions is usually 2 months. To help you structure your responses, you can group reviewer comments together based on the part of the manuscript that they refer to. You can decide whether additional experiments are needed. Often in chemistry, that's one of the main suggestions. But in biology, field work you may only have a chance to do field work once per year. So in chemistry, you may be able to do experiments within days or weeks, and you may be able to include those in the revision. So make a list of changes needed: minor rewriting, language improvement, word count reduction. They may ask you to combine figures into one figure, or delete figures, or maybe move a figure from the supplemental materials to the main manuscript, and vice versa. Take all their comments into consideration. Whether or not you'll agree with the comments or not, you can deal with that later. But just make a list of all the changes needed in every section. You may have to revise your data analysis. Use a different model or a different statistical method. That may be one of the things you may be asked to do. And then you can make an outline of your response letter and make sure you respond to all the reviewers' comments. Don't ignore some comments, otherwise the reviewers will get upset. So here's what you do when you agree with the reviewer. You can thank them for their comments and say, we agreed with your suggested changes to whatever line numbers, and then give a reason. And then you've made your changes on the specific line numbers as per your suggestion. So thank the reader, thank the reviewer, say that you agree and explain why, describe the changes made, and then indicate where you made the changes. And if you disagree with the reviewer, basically you're doing the exact same thing. Thank the reviewer for their comment. Say that you understand the concern. However, because of this, maybe you did not make the change, or you just made a minor change, but you didn't follow their advice word for word, and show them where you made the change. So it's okay to disagree as long as you provide evidence. And it's important when you disagree with the reviewer, show them that you understood the comment that they made. Explain why you disagreed, and then the changes, if you made any. Maybe you did not make changes. And if you did, indicate which line number on the manuscript where you made the changes. Here's maybe some things you wanted to say. You may want to reply, oh, you just didn't understand what we wrote. And what you could say is, some statements that we made were slightly ambiguous. We have clarified the text. Maybe you're asked to make more experiments. Don't tell them, oh, that experiment would take forever. You can tell them, this reviewer, kindly, that the suggested experiment is very interesting. However, we feel that it is beyond the scope of our study. If it clearly is going to take way too much time to do the experiment, you can kindly say it's beyond the scope of our study. You may want to tell a reviewer that you didn't even read what we wrote. So don't say that. Maybe they misinterpreted what you wrote. And you can reply that we did not intend to indicate this, therefore we altered the text, and then you can make a clarification. You may want to tell the reviewer they're just being too picky about grammar and formatting. That's a bad idea to do that. The reviewers have spent a lot of time on your paper, and these small changes are actually going to improve your paper. So thank them for the review, apologize for the errors, and make the suggested changes. This is from PhD Comics. This is one of my favorite comic strips, and they have some really funny examples of how not to respond. On the right is actually my favorite. Is the comment is, "This paper is poorly written and unscientifically unsound. I do not recommend it for publication." It says, "You bleep 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 reviewer, I know who you are. I'm going to get you when it's my turn to review." No, you don't want to say that. You would like to say, "This reviewer raises an interesting concern. However, we feel the reviewer did not fully comprehend the scope of the work and misjudged the results based on incorrect assumptions." So there's how not to respond, and then a more polite response to the reviewer. Here's another tip. It's good to use manuscript line numbers when you're preparing your manuscript, and also when you're preparing your revised manuscript. Keep in mind, if you have major changes made, the line numbers will actually change. So when you direct the reviewer and the editor to where the changes were made, make sure you include updated manuscript line numbers. And then you can easily explain where the changes have been made in the manuscript. And there's a screenshot of the help text for adding line numbers on Microsoft Word. It's good to divide the comments into logical groups. This will help editors and reviewers track changes. It's also good to make a summary at the end. And actually, you'll include this at the beginning of your responding letters of the major changes that were made to the manuscript. You may have 10 or 20 pages of minor changes, but the major concerns, this should be put in the beginning of your responding letters. That these are the most important changes that you made. So the biggest changes should come first, and then the smaller ones, and then the changes in each section of the paper. So it's good to group the comments. A lot of peer reviewers will group the major concerns first, and then give you minor concerns. So that may already be set up for you in that format, and you can just respond to the major concerns and then the minor concerns from each reviewer. It's a good idea to give point-by-point responses to the peer reviewers. So you can, if they have a long list of comments, then you can organize your responding letters. You can use headings like Reviewer 1, then Comment 1. And this will make it easier for the editor and reviewers to follow what you have done. And it also helps you to that you addressed each comment, every point the reviewer made or the journal editor made on your manuscript. It's good to restate the reviewer's comments. The reviewers will not recall the order in which the comments were written or the wording they used. So you can copy and then paste their original comment into the responding letters and then give the reply, the response to the comment. So even if a reviewer has numbered his or her comments, do not simply write down comment 1 followed by a response. Restate the comment. And if the reviewers had similar comments, do not ask one reviewer to, see the responses to reviewer 2, or simply write comment 1, see the responses to comment 7 from reviewer 1. That's a bad idea. You got to treat each reviewer as if that comment is the only comment that you received from that reviewer on your manuscript. Pay attention to details. Details are important when explaining how you have addressed each concern. For example, if a reviewer has said that you need to include or reinterpret data or redo a data analysis, you can describe the tests you performed and the results you got and mention where you have added this information. Or if you did a reanalysis and it didn't really change the result, you can put the analysis into the responding letters, but do not put it into the manuscript. At least you can show the reviewer that you tried other statistical tests and so forth. You may even make a figure to put in the responding letters, but do not put the figure into the paper, just to show that you followed their advice. And if you didn't want to put it in the paper, then don't put it in the paper. You can just put it in the responding letters. So you may be considerate to the reviewers and even copy and paste the exact revised sentences or the modified sentences, and you can copy and paste those into the responding letters. And then this will save the editor's time, and they don't have to toggle and switch files between the peer reviewer comments, the responses to the peer reviewer comments, and your article. So that's a way that you can save their time, and it's appreciated a lot. And speaking of appreciation, it's good to appreciate the reviewer's work. Reviewers are investing their own time without pay to review your manuscript. And for the most part, their intention is to help the authors improve the study. And that's typically how peer review works. The reviewers will increase the quality of the manuscript before it's published. So take advantage of their advice. Thank them for their comments. In fact, a long list of detailed comments from the reviewer means that the reviewer has spent a lot of time on your study and to provide constructive feedback. So don't forget to thank them for their consideration and effort. Here's what you do when you disagree with the suggested changes that are made. We'll take a poll first. Do you think it is okay to disagree with a reviewer? Yes or no? We'll give you 30 seconds to answer this question. We are almost unanimous here. So, all right, Neha, you can show the answers. All right. So, yes, it is okay to disagree with the reviewer. Remember, the reviewers are only making recommendations on the paper. It's the editors that are making the decisions. So, sorry, I'm trying to turn off the subtitles, which always pop on there. So our peer reviewer is always right. I think that's another one of the questions. Even if it's a senior scientist, that doesn't mean the peer reviewer is always right. They're experts in the field, but their comments should not be taken as gospel. It is okay to disagree with the reviewer. You can say you respectively disagree with the peer reviewer. Yeah, so if you do disagree with the suggested changes, remember, at least you can agree that you disagree. So remember, the reviewers do not have the same expertise as you. They're not always right. They may ask for changes that are not possible. They may be impossible to do all their suggested changes. Maybe they misunderstood something. You can point out politely in your responding letter that maybe there's a misunderstanding, and you can be open to revising the text even slightly to adjust the reviewer's comments. The reviewer may be wrong, but check if you are right. And sometimes if you disagree with some comments, you can explain why you disagree with the comment, because the editor actually will look at your responses. You can make a stronger case for your viewpoint, maybe cite some more papers, add more evidence, or just make a better judgment. Or you can look for a compromise that will satisfy both sides. You can slightly modify the writing, or if the suggested change doesn't really affect the overall paper, maybe you can just make the change if it doesn't affect the meaning of what you have written. So sometimes you can just make the changes as a compromise. But don't compromise your science. Don't compromise your integrity. If you know the reviewer is wrong, you can politely, respectfully disagree and then give evidence. So watch your tone when you respond to peer reviewers. Remember, they're critiquing your work, not you. So it's okay to disagree, but not okay to disrespect. So don't let your responses reflect any bitterness. If you disagree on a point, you can say you respectfully disagree, give supporting statements, state your rationale, scientific explanation, or even references from the literature that support your viewpoint. Do not agree for the sake of agreeing, unless it's a really minor change that doesn't really affect the meaning of what you wrote. So don't agree for the sake of agreeing. Evaluate each of the reviewer's comments on their merits. Remember, at the end of the day, it is your study and your reputation that is at stake. So if you agree for the sake of agreeing, you'll give a mistaken impression to the journal editor that he'll expect you to incorporate all of the reviewer's suggestions. You don't need to do that. You can pick which comments you agree with and which ones you disagree with. We expect that there's going to be some disagreements, so it's okay to disagree. But choose your battles wisely. Like I said, if you disagree with the reviewer, maybe if a change that you make to a sentence or a paragraph requested by the reviewer does not affect the intended meaning, you can do your best to make the change. That's the compromise I talked about. It doesn't hurt you, and it sends the message that you took their suggestion seriously. However, if you feel the requested change will negatively affect the paper, go ahead and respectfully disagree. And provide well-reasoned arguments. So don't simply state your disagreement. You got to give reasons. So provide as many details as possible to help the reviewer understand your line of reasoning. And wherever possible, you can cite published studies, or if you did more experiments, or if you did some experiments that weren't published, they're like, oh yeah, we checked this, and this isn't the case. You can state that in your responding letters that you looked at other things and you took their points into consideration. But you, in the end, disagree with them. So do reviewers and editors always agree on what's worthy of publication? The answer to that is no. Remember, the reviewers can only make recommendations. It's the editors that make the decisions. Some editors will reject a manuscript even if one peer reviewer recommends rejection. Some editors will only reject when the majority of the peer reviewers recommend rejection. And some only when all reviewers recommend rejection. So it's common for peer reviewers to give conflicting feedback on the same manuscript. One journal editor even went as far to say is that unanimity between reviewers is rare. So it is actually very rare to actually have all three reviewers give the same recommendation. So in the case of conflicting feedback, the journal editor may choose to send the paper to a third reviewer or an additional reviewer before making a decision. And in this case, the author will have to wait longer for the peer review process to be completed. And this is our last poll question. And I'll give you a full minute to complete this one. So you have to scroll down to read all the responses. So what would you do in case there were conflicting opinions in the reviewer comments? So one is ignore the reviewer you disagree with. B, respond to both. Tell one reviewer you respectfully disagree and provide evidence and make changes per the other reviewer. Or respond to both reviewers as above and a confidential note to the editor. Or D, pit one reviewer against the other and let the editor decide. So you can vote. Which of those 4 things would you do? Again, I'm not going to say there's no wrong or right. There's no single wrong or right answer. Maybe a combination of both of them. So I'll give you another 30 seconds to submit your vote. Okay, 5 more seconds. Okay, can we see the results of the poll? I think most people put B or C, so it is good to respond to both reviewers. And sometimes if the one reviewer is really problematic, or you feel that the reviewer has a conflict of interest, you may want to send a note to the editor, but that's a very, very rare case. But you do want to respond to both reviewers and tell one reviewer that you respectfully disagree and explain why, and then make the changes as per the other reviewer. You don't want to pit one reviewer against the other. You want to treat each of the reviews as if that was the only review you have received on that paper. So minor differences of opinion are natural, but such diametrically opposite views can be confusing, can be perplexing. So see which reviewer you agree with more, follow his or her advice, and justify your decision to the editor. So you may want to even, in that case, in your cover letter to the editor, explain that there was some disagreements with the reviewers. So alternatively, the editor can give you a third opinion, but keep in mind, if they invite another reviewer, it can take a long time to get that extra review. But in the end, remember, it's the journal editor who will make the decision on how to handle the conflict. And providing a well-reasoned argument is a tip may likely tip the balance in your favor. Do not pit one reviewer against the other. One argument you should never use when responding to reviewers is that only one reviewer took issue with an aspect of the paper, whereas the other reviewer saw nothing wrong with it. So respond to each reviewer as if the review were the only one you received. In some situations, the reviewers will make complete opposite recommendations. And in these situations, you have to decide which comment you should take, which one will improve the paper. However, do not ignore the suggestion by the other reviewer. And provide a logical explanation to both reviewers for why you feel that one of the suggestions will be more effective in improving the paper. So dealing with requests for major changes, you may have word count reduction, maybe just word count reduction in the abstract or maybe the overall paper. You'll certainly have no choice but to comply with this request. You may want to move some methods to supplemental materials. There's lots of different ways to reduce word count. EDITAGE actually has part of their service is to help reduce word count. You may be asked for extra data or text. Make sure you have enough time to complete extra experiments. If you don't, you can send a note to the editor and ask for an extension for your revised manuscript. Make sure you provide the changes within the specified time frame. But you may first want to consult with the journal editors to determine whether there's enough space requirements and enough time to make these additions. And finally, I'll give you some sample responses to peer reviewer comments. Here's a sample response letter to the editor-in-chief. Here, the author highlights the major changes made. If you look at the third paragraph, it says that I've added 4 figures to the manuscript that should have been included in the first manuscript. So the major stuff has been addressed in here. And then there's a point-by-point response letter that will accompany this cover letter for the responding letter to the editor. So here are some sample responses to peer reviewer comments. One is there's unclear why 6 items are retained for each subscale, given the remaining items did not provide acceptable infit and outfit statistics. Although the authors have tried to address why these unfit items were included, the reasons given The totality of these indices seem inappropriate. It is not convincing at all. Yeah, so here the authors thanked the reviewer for the insightful comment. The text of the manuscript was modified, and then in they showed the line number, the page number, and line number. They showed the items showed large outfit statistics, and they gave the statistical results, and defended that these seemed appropriate when other indices of these items, such as infit statistics or item total correlations, are considered. So here they kept the statistics in there, and they gave a line of reasoning why to keep the statistics as they were. And here's a general comment that the language in the introduction could stand to be tightened throughout, although the introduction is not overly long, and this is a minor suggestion. So here a good response would be that you revised the entire manuscript has been carefully edited. When they say that the language should be tightened, it means it should be carefully copy edited. So as a result, the clarity and readability of the manuscript has been improved. And don't forget to thank that reviewer for their comment. If you feel like you've been treated unfairly in peer review, how do you appeal the editor's decision? Well, there's an appeals process for every journal. Usually starts by making a rebuttal letter, just like you would for other manuscripts. But you want to consider addressing it to the editorial office or editor-in-chief. If you want to appeal rejection, the editor will sometimes ask you, like, what do you plan? Give me some sample responses to the reviewers of what you plan to do, and why do you want to appeal the rejection? Make point-by-point arguments supported by evidence and logical reasoning. The tone should not be accusatory, and the appeal should mention why you think the paper is particularly suitable for the journal and how the readers will benefit from your study. And this will make your case stronger. It's rare to actually have your appeal granted, but I've had it happen a few times to me. So if you're appealing the rejection, it could be reviewer conflict of interest, but usually this is avoided because you're asked for recommended reviewers and opposed reviewers when you submit your article. So usually journals honor such requests, but be aware some top journals may take this as a cue to invite that reviewer. So be careful if you have a reviewer conflict of interest. How to become a peer reviewer? This actually will make you a better author. And there's no one way to become a peer reviewer, but you can ask a colleague who already reviews for a journal to recommend you. A lot of journals have, actually are looking for younger peer reviewers, and you can email the editorial office or the editor-in-chief that you can recommend yourself as well. Say, I'd like to peer review for the journal. A lot of journals have nice mentoring programs for early career researchers. So there's a couple journals like that, and you can check the instruction for authors webpage and the journal homepage. A lot of times they have programs to get early career reviewers involved as peer reviewers. So in summary, when you're responding to peer reviewers, be positive, be polite, and concise. Start with a paragraph outlining the major changes made, and then deal with the points one by one. Use line numbers to explain where changes have been made, and explain which suggestions you rejected and why. And in conclusion, comments from peer reviewers, more often than not, offer an excellent opportunity to improve the writing in your manuscript and the overall presentation of your manuscript. So addressing them adequately may increase the chances of acceptance, if not at that journal, then at another journal. And if your paper is rejected from the first journal you submit to, or if you decide not to send a revision back to the journal, do not send the paper to a second journal without attempting to address the concerns of the original reviewers. What happens very frequently, the new journal will invite the same reviewers because Web of Science helps to locate some of the reviewers, or the authors may recommend the same recommended reviewers to the new journal. So this happens all the time. And if you don't make the changes, then the reviewers who are reviewing your manuscript again will be annoyed. So that concludes the webinar. And at this point, I think we have about 5 minutes for questions and answers. And I'm going to turn on my video. And thank you very much for your attention. Okay, does anybody have any questions? I think if you asked questions during the webinar, we may have flagged them. Don't forget to click on the feedback form because we'll be having more webinar workshops, and feedback will be very valuable in helping to prepare for the next webinar. Okay, I got a question from Mohammed Majub. So honestly, what do you think of open access journals? Well, one trend that is certain is that there are more and more open access journals, and even the subscription journals have open access options, and these are called hybrid journals. Integrative Zoology is one of those. Actually, we're mandated to give the open access option because a lot of research that has been done with public funding actually require the ending publication to be open access. So, just to fit the requirements of the funding organizations, it's important to have at least, the golden open access is immediate open access, or green open access, which is open access within 6 months. There are some predatory journals out there, and there is a list of journals called the Beals list. You can Google that, but just be aware there are some predatory journals out there. So open access has its pluses and minuses, and I do see the open access journals. There are some not good ones, and there's some excellent open access journals. Even as a hybrid journal, the papers do get a lot more access and downloads if they're open access publications. But there is an overall trend towards open access. So just be careful with open access journals. And thank you, Neha. She gave a web link to the Beals list. And this is just a database of predatory publishers. So often, a lot of these open access journals, the peer reviewing is almost non-existent. Like you'll get they can accept your paper with very minimum peer review, and it's often done very quickly. And then they ask for a lot of money to publish your paper. So Misswire asked a question, how to address the comments where reviewers are asking to cite their relevant, irrelevant papers. So, I think any journal editor will know if a reviewer is trying, I like to call it citation padding, to cite some of their own work. Most papers have a limited number of citations that you can have. You may want to just cite the most relevant work and not cite the irrelevant work. I think the journal editor will help, they'll agree with you why you choose some papers. So I've only seen that happen just a couple times of several thousand papers that I've helped be the handling editor for. So, and I tend to not ask those reviewers to review more papers because I know they're just trying to get citations for themselves. So, So Mamo, do you have another comment? Some reviewers send me very rude replies with disregarding my paper. That does not sound very professional at all. I would actually contact the editorial office about that. Maybe it's a good idea to ask for another reviewer. It might delay the peer review process by 1 or 2 months. But in general, we like to keep high degrees of professionality. Okay, I have a question from Khalid Mohisen. Thank you for your nice presentation. Is it common to reject a paper depending on only one reviewer comment? Typically, we like to have a balanced peer review. If we only have one peer reviewer comment or one reviewer score returned, I typically will get an editorial board member involved to help assess the paper. Sometimes a review is not very useful, so it's not good to only have one reviewer comment, or if you have a negative review. One reviewer recommendation of rejection is not the kiss of death for a paper. We've accepted a lot of papers where a reviewer has recommended rejection, but we looked at other comments and we got the editorial board also involved. So I wouldn't worry too much about one reviewer killing a paper. So Benatundi Salami asked, why would an editor side with one reviewer among 5 reviewers where 4 said should be accepted? I have not received a convincing answer. I hope to get one today if you can. So yeah, wow, if you had 5 reviewers review your manuscript, I think it would be strange if one did not agree with the publication of your paper. Usually if I get 3 reviewers, one will not like the paper. It's almost a given that one will not like a paper. Unless that one reviewer, who knows, it might be a favorite reviewer of the journal, or it may be a very senior scientist. You may never know. And sometimes the editor will actually side with that one reviewer when you have unanimous support from the 4 other reviewers. I would say that was just a case of bad luck. But I think it might be it could be an editorial board member of the journal, or someone with a close relationship with the journal. That is their opinion is very highly valued. It's unfortunate that one reviewer can actually overturn 4 other positive reviews. I got a clarification on the use of the Beals list. Basically, you can click on, I'll just share the screen really quick, and let's see, and just give you a quick tutorial on that. Here we are. I know we're a little over time, but I wanted to share this screen. So here's the Beals list, and if you can see, you can search for a publisher here. This is actually a reputable journal. It's a family of journals from Switzerland, but they're open access journals. So you can just do a search in here and see if that's the publisher name, or you can look at the name of the specific journal. There's actually an original list here too, if you can see my screen. And let's see. Oh, that's just the Wikipedia list. So yeah, here's the updated list. So there's MDPI. Actually, I put in the search here, and it says this was not included in the list. However, I would urge anyone who wants to publish with this publisher to thoroughly read this Wikipedia article detailing their possible ethical publishing problems and a recent article discussing their growth. So that I've actually published an MDPI. So, all right, I'll go back to this screen. I'll stop sharing. So I hope that helped looking at the Beals list. All right, I think we have time for one more question, and then I know we're a little bit over time. But Yujia Lin asked, thank you for the informative presentation. What should I do to become a member of the editorial team in the journals? Actually, becoming on the editorial board is an honor. And you can send an email to the editorial office and maybe your CV and ask to be considered to be on the editorial board. Usually these are selected by the editor-in-chief and the editorial office. And oftentimes the review boards, the editorial board is only changed like once every 3 years. So you may want to figure out like when they change their board members, and then you can just send an email to the editorial office and also convince them that you're a well-published author. You may want to give them your CV. You may want to review for the journal, or offer to organize a special issue for the journal. And that's a way to get your foot in the door with that journal. So, okay, I think this wraps up everything. There's a couple more questions. We don't have time to get to them. So at this, I would like to conclude the session, and thank you for your attention. I wish you the best of luck on your publishing success. And everyone should be able to get a copy of the presentation. I think Daniel's going to pop on here and wrap up. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jacob, for that webinar. Thank you, all of us. I can see most of you who joined us at the start are still here. So thank you so much for your patience. We apologize that we did stretch a little over time, but I think time well spent. And we thank you for your questions. As I mentioned, this is just one of a series of webinars that we'd like to do with King Fahd, and the next one is scheduled for the 14th of March. Dr. Khodja will ensure that you receive those details. And if you haven't already, please to fill in the feedback form. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to take your feedback and then use that for our next webinar. And also do spread the word with your colleagues for the next webinar. We'd like to see more and more of you. And then finally, do check out the website that we have created for King Fahd, and for you to take advantage of some of the services that we've customized for King Fahd, and that we've also discounted highly for the benefit of the researchers there. So with that, I'll end. I want to say thank you again for all of your time, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everyone.